Hi, good evening. It's really a great pleasure to introduce Pamela Stewart Mills Hoch and Bob Hoch. I know Pamela since, I believe, 1989, was it? When, without going into any big detail, there was a judgment subsequently, the first judgment in Canada for removal, changing the custody of a child, and basically it was upheld by the Court of Appeals. And I believe that was the first one in Canada, was it not? And they had a very good psychologist actually involved. But be that as it may, let me tell you a little bit about Bob. Bob is a retired intelligence officer. He has a master's in economics, a bachelor's in international relations, and basically what he is right now, he's the vice president of the Association of Missing and Exploited Children's Organizations, which is funded by the United States Department of Justice. He is the executive director and co-founder of the Rachel Foundation for Family Reintegration, which, if I understand correctly, is the pioneer in basically deprogramming of children who have been alienated. Pamela, a fellow Canadian, is the mother of 4 children, and basically for the past 20 years, since the judgment and since the case that went to court, she's focused on solutions in severe alienation and abduction cases. She is presently a doctoral candidate in counseling and the founder of the Canadian Parental Alienation Information Network, which was in existence, I think, in the 90s for about 10 years. She's an expert witness to Canadian, she's been an expert witness in the States. She's been accepted as an expert witness, I believe, in 18 states. And basically, as well, she's the recipient of Award of Honor from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children for outstanding contributions to the issues of missing and exploited children. She is presently the program director, co-founder of the Rachel Foundation, and it really is a pleasure to see Pamela after so many years.
Yes. Thank you, Abe. Thank you.
Thank you, Abe. I have here today's Globe and Mail. And there is a cartoon named Betty. And the couple is sitting over a, looks like a cup of coffee. Or, no, there's a pot there, so it must be tea.
Yes.
This is a Canadian paper. Our son was talking on a phone, sending texts, receiving emails, and sending video messages. I know. I saw it too. He's a whiz at communications, just not with us. Boy, does that ring a bell or what? We're here tonight to talk about Rachel House. Our mission is to rebuild families one at a time. The families that come to us are children and target parents for whom everything else hasn't worked. We are the ones they call when traditional therapy fails. We've been doing this since 2000 as the Rachel Foundation, but actually, as you'll learn, it actually goes back a lot farther than that. Before we get into it, though, I want to tell you 2 things. Number one, we are not funded by any major organization, no government, no big foundation. We survive as best we can on program fees and private donations, but we have yet to have to turn somebody away for lack of funds. Thank you. The second thing is, Pamela and I are volunteers. We take no salary. We happen to be blessed with other sources of income, and as you can tell, we're not missing many meals. At least I'm not. And so what we have, the story that we have for you tonight is one born of passion. And with that, I think I'll let Pamela go back to the beginning.
Okay, can you all hear me? Okay, thank you to the audiovisual guys who've wired us up. We're not able to stand in front of a podium, sorry. It is a great honor to be here tonight as a Canadian. Aussi, je voudrais vous dire que si vous avez besoin de quelque chose en français, je parle français comme une bonne Québécoise. And il me fera plaisir de vous parler après, si vous voulez. My story, the story of Rachel House, started 20 years ago in Abe Warren-Klein's office. Now this thing is clicking. Is that okay, guys? Or what can I do to stop it clicking? In Abe Warren-Klein's office, when I had, my 4 children were kidnapped and brainwashed and taught to hate me. I think it's settled down now, has it? Just what do you want to do with it? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, just wait.
There, okay. And Abe listened to my story and gave me, went to his bookshelf and he took out a book and he handed it to me and he said, "This is your situation. Read this and you will understand what's happening to you." And it was Richard Gardner's first 1985-86 book, The Parental Alienation Syndrome. And Abe made me go away and change all the she's to he because I broke the mold. I was an alienated mother. And bless his heart, darling Richard Gardner, who I knew very well, had written the book as being the alienator was always the mom. So the alienator was she, and the alienated target parent was he. So I had to go back home and photocopy Abe's book and take out all the she's and change them to he's because he said the judges would never have the patience to turn it around themselves. Of course, he was right. And that really started us on the odyssey that 20 years later has turned into the Rachel House program for reuniting children and parents who are severely alienated. As Bob said, we deal only with the cases that nobody wants, the cases where everything else has failed. And it's based really on my own story. I lost my 4 children to parental alienation syndrome. And I went through absolutely every form of treatment. There was group therapy, individual therapy, family therapy. The children were actually placed at one point in time in foster care to separate them from the alienating parent. And nothing worked. And thanks to a team of people led really in the background by Abe, to whom I am forever grateful, and a wonderful attorney called Anne-France Goldwater, a psychologist called Linda Greenberg, a social worker called Linda Danson, wonderful, wonderful people in Montreal. Eventually, it got before Judge Gummery, who you all know, and Judge Gummery really understood what was going on and eventually ended up giving me custody. But the catch in the get-along was I had a boy and a girl who were by then teenagers, and I had a boy and a girl who were 7 and 8. And the teenagers were judged to be too far gone at that time to be given back to me, even though Abe will talk a little bit about this tomorrow, I believe, but the judge had said that, you know, they were severely alienated from me and that it was the fathers who had done it. So he split the family in 2 in a Solomonic decision, which was historic and all the rest. And so in February of 1991, at midnight, I got a call from the police and they said they had found my children and it was in the middle of a snowstorm and I had nowhere to go. When you have a severely alienated child and you have been accused of every single conceivable ill under the sun and evil, there's no way that I could have brought my children home with me. I would have been very vulnerable to their accusations of abuse. And I would have had no proof that I didn't abuse them. And so I needed somewhere safe and warm and loving and caring, but above all safe, where I could go to rebuild the relationship with my little boy and little girl. And I ended up in a wonderful women's shelter, the Auberge Shalom in Montreal, Jewish Family Services Women's Shelter. But it was the closest we could get to being a good environment, but it certainly wasn't optimal. I mean, I was in this shelter with a bunch of, battered women and their children, and what I needed to do was rebuild the relationship with my 2 little ones. So it worked. I stayed there for 6 weeks, and very symbolically, I went home to my apartment on Passover. It was amazing, the symbolism, and it's coming up to Passover in a couple of weeks. And It always touches me that the day that I went home with my children was the day after Passover Eve. But during that time, my children were very, very, very hostile in the beginning. They were hitting and kicking and spitting and running away and curling up in fetal position and all sorts of things. And so during those 6 weeks, I rebuilt the relationship with them with the help of people like the social worker and the encouragement of these wonderful professionals who believed that we could do this together. And because I'm a teacher and trained to observe children's behavior, in the daytime I worked at rebuilding the relationship, and at night I took notes and a journal describing my children's behavior. And basically, the things that happened in those 6 weeks form the nucleus of the program that we today run at Rachel House. What of my 2 older children, you ask? Well, 10 years later, the phone rang one evening, and it was my oldest daughter calling me, and we were reunited when she was 21. I had kissed her goodbye going to school one morning when she was 11, and she came back to me when she was 21. I still cry to this day when I tell you that. My voice just breaks with joy. And however, let me tell you, I went through then another whole experience of reuniting with my adult daughter. And that was so different from reuniting with the little ones. She was 21. There were 10 years that were missing. But I had done many things during that time. For example, I had taken a bereavement workshop that I had set up myself and really worked on saying goodbye to the little children that I had kissed goodbye going to school in that morning in December 1989. And being prepared to greet whatever this child was when he or she would come back to me. And so I had done a lot of interior work in those 10 years so that I was ready to greet and welcome my 21-year-old without bitterness, without anger. And I had also done a lot of work on myself, and this is so important for those of you who are parents of alienated children. It is so important to keep your sense of humor, to stay whole, to take care of yourself, to be the most complete person that you can be without your children. Because children gravitate to health and wellness. And that is what will bring your children back to you ultimately, is if you are healthy and you have kept your own mental health, your own sense of humor, and if you can forgive and be without bitterness and without anger. Those are the threads of the tapestry that will pull your children back to you, no matter what age they are. And at Rachel House, I mean, we have, tell them about David, darling, the David Buber.
We met a gentleman who married, had a child, but their circumstances were such that he had to go to another city to work. In fact, he went to another state. While he was doing that, his wife sought a divorce unilaterally and poisoned the relationship between their very small child and Dad. She remarried, didn't tell the second husband that he was even still alive. And the second husband raised the child as it was his own. In time, she died. And when that happened, the truth came out. And it just so happened that a woman who knew our friend David knew his son's best friend in another state. And through some prodding there, they reached out. And after 49 years, the son and father had a close relationship for about 3 years until father died of cancer. We always keep that story in the back of our head because one thing that we always tell people is never, never, never give up.
So anyway, in the Auberge Shalom, in those really stormy, cold Canadian winter nights, the passion was born. That I realized along the way that there were other parents out there who were going through the same sort of thing. And because my case by then had reached a certain notoriety, it was in all the Canadian newspapers, front page, and also in the United States. And so people were reaching out to me and asking me for help. And I really just got the passion that we needed a place. We need a safe place to reunite parents and children. And I knew from my personal experience that therapy doesn't work. I love therapists. I'm a counselor myself. But traditional counseling will never work. You take a child for 50 minutes in a week. I mean, it's like, you know, going to the emergency room with water, poisoning from drinking poisoned water, making the child all better again, and antibiotics and drips, and sending the kid back to drink poisoned water. It doesn't work. And I think that all the speakers along the way here have pointed that out. The other thing is that the children who come to us are so jaded of anything that smacks of therapy, psychology, counseling. They don't want to know anything. They don't want anything that smacks of a professional clinical relationship, because they have been iatrogenically damaged. They have been, you know, they have been just therapized to death. So everything we do, even though it is therapy, it is counseling, is couched in the everyday language of a home. And Bob and I lived there. We're the house grandparents, if you like. We're the figures that, you know, we're both of us getting on a little bit now. And so the parents can trust us as they would trust their own parents, and the children trust us as they would trust a grandparent. And so gradually, anyway, through my own experience, and here in Canada, I did a lot of work. I worked with Senator Ann Cools when they were revising the divorce laws in the mid-90s, and talked a lot on Canadian TV and radio. And I have very good, happy memories of being in Canada. And before I went to the United States to work in this field. But the burning desire was always to have a Rachel house. And in 2000, I met this guy. He is what I call my current husband. It kind of, well, what else can you say? Somebody else used the word current husband to make sure that you all know that he wasn't the one that kidnapped the children all those years ago. But essentially, I started reuniting children in 1991 when the Missing Children's Network of Canada sent a woman to me whose child had been kidnapped and was in the same school system as my two little ones. And they said, okay, this lady, Mrs. Stuart Mills, she can help you. She knows all about this. So this woman landed on my doorstep and said, please, you know, can you reunite me with my daughter? And we ended up actually doing the reunification in my apartment. And I saw the same behaviors in that little girl as I had seen in my own children. Exactly the same behaviors, the same progression, everything. And so I said, okay, there's something to this. There's a system. There's something that's working here. But the essential ingredient was you've got to take the child away from the toxic parent. And remember, I am only talking about severe cases. There are many, many cases out there that are in between, where you have maybe two parents who are crazy. That happens, you know. Excuse my use of lay terms, but it's late and I don't want to bore you. So you need to remove the child, and you need a home. It's no point in bringing the child to a clinic. You can't replicate human life. You cannot replicate family life in a clinic or in a visitation center. You need the home environment. And that's what Bob and I have created together, and that's what we're doing. So you want to move into the PowerPoint, Bob?
We obtain cases from two sources. One, and of course, obviously, by far and away, the greatest number we see as a result of high conflict divorce. I don't need to explain that. Everybody in this room knows about that and alienation. The ultimate expression of alienation, however, we see as being abduction. It happens that in custody cases, things don't go somebody's way, and they up and run off with the kids. And one of our early cases was one in which mother went underground, lived totally on a cash basis in another city and was gone for 9 years. The child did not go to school, was, quote, homeschooled, and was wondering what he was going to do when he was 16 and could get a driver's license because he didn't have a birth certificate with his current name. It happens. And there are people who help that happen. There are people in the Department of Justice did a study years ago in which they estimate that hundreds of children go missing each year as a result of stranger abductions. And these are the ones that you see on crime TV and that sort of thing.
Elizabeth Smart, for example, Lindsay Ryan.
But the study also estimates that hundreds of thousands of children go missing every year because of family members. Now, sometimes this means they're reported to the police as missing and they're actually late for a pickup or something like that. So there's a lot of that kind of noise in these numbers, but there still are a fair number of people every year who just up and run off.